This episode is brought to you by iZotope. Our friends over at iZotope create the most thoughtfully and intuitively designed software for audio repair, mixing, and mastering. I use their tools every day for the podcast, and I love it. And I think you will too. Go over to iZotope.com and check it out. That's iZotope.com. IZOTOPE. Use the code FRET10 at checkout for a 10% discount. That's all caps, FRET, and the number 10.
Allow me to live and breathe like a man.
You've heard his words on classic albums like Pacific Ocean Blue and Friends. His 1969 collaboration with Brian Wilson, A World of Peace Must Come, gained almost legendary status as one of pop's most storied lost albums, before being resurrected to great acclaim by Light in the Attic in 2008. Now you're cordially invited to take a trip into the mind of poet and songwriter Stephen J. Kolinich. Heyday Again Records presents I Love My Life, a postcard from one of the last standing poets of peace and excitation. Order your copy today. I Love My Life by Stephen J. Kolinich and Friends. You'll see why heavy hitters like Brian Wilson, Dennis Wilson, Paul McCartney, Steve Cropper, P.F. Sloan, and Diana Ross have all worked with him. I Love My Life by Stephen J. Kolinich. Order today at realgonemusic.com. Again, that's realgonemusic.com.
So then I get this phone call. The phone rings in my office at the agency, and I pick it up, and he says, "Hello, this is Brian Wilson, and I need to write this album for Capitol, and I don't have anybody to write it with, and I'm under a lot of pressure because we owed, we're already 3 months behind. We should have had it 3 months ago, and I was wondering if you wanted to work on some of the songs with me." which is like out of the clear blue, somebody saying, "Would you like, $50,000?"
Welcome to another episode of Discograffiti's wildly in-depth Beach Boys series and Your Dreams Come True, where Brian Wilson freaks like you and me get our chance to delve deep into the barely believable history and prodigious discography of my favorite band of all time, and also coincidentally the best, along with a slew of over 50 top-shelf guests, ranging from musicians inspired by their work, family members, documentary directors, songwriting collaborators, Beach Boys authors, producers, touring band members, and for good measure, some of the Beach Boys themselves. I'm your host, Dave Gebrow, and special thanks goes out to co-producers Chuck Granata, Dennis Dyken, and Mark Freed, without whom this series would not have happened. And in this episode, we'll be turning our spray cans on the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds. Welcome to the Chuck Granata interview series, a very special collection of conversations about the Beach Boys' pet sounds that have never before seen the light of day. In the early 2000s, my friend Chuck Granata conducted a series of telephone interviews with members of the Beach Boys, studio musicians, family members, historians, authors, experts, and more, recording it all on minidisc and pulling quotes that ultimately wound up in his incredible book, Wouldn't It Be Nice? Brian Wilson and the Making of the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds. The minidiscs with the interviews were then all labeled, boxed up, and packed away. That is, until now. Chuck has done a bit of audio sprucing where needed, and I've trimmed them down for broadcast, but otherwise, this act of loving curation is brought to you as an act of historical TLC. Of course, I can't possibly thank Chuck Granata enough, and you should definitely pick up his book if you haven't already. The next entry in the Chuck Granata Pet Sounds interview series is from Chuck's chat with Tony ASHER, Brian Wilson's Pet Sounds lyrical collaborator. Here are just a few of the many things that Tony discusses with Discograffiti in this podcast. The tantalizing pitch to rewrite some Beach Boys lyrics that Tony wound up turning down in the director's cut only. How his work writing jingles for Mattel toys dovetailed creatively into his experience working with Brian in the director's cut only. Granular details of Tony's very first hang with Brian. the grand total of Beach Boys LPs that Tony Asher owns, his opinion of pre-Pet Sounds Beach Boys lyrics, and details surrounding the wild Lauren Schwarz parties which the two men both attended. If you're a Beach Boys superfan like me, you'll want to turn this free version off right now and opt for the director's cut of this episode on our Patreon page, which features 14 additional minutes of essential material. And you can find it in our Patreon shop for mere pennies at patreon.com/discograffiti/shop. Here it is then, Tony Asher.
So you're in advertising and you were doing jingles. How did you come to Brian's attention, and did he just call you on the phone one day?
He did, but that wasn't the first contact.
So what was your first contact? Tell me how that whole first meeting went.
Well, it's funny because in the days when I was doing jingles, it was really funny. The recording studios in town, I suppose there must have been some recording studios that the film industry was using. Although in those days, I think most of the stuff they did on sound stages, with big orchestras or even small groups, and did it to playback and so forth. And if they had to record something for some reason that wasn't to playback, they would just use their own facilities. So the outside recording studios my impression was that they were all focused on the record business and not on film stuff particularly. And the reason I mention that is that the record business, by the time the 60s rolled around, was already recording most of the time in the evening. And, people we just weren't getting up until 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And, you can't imagine that, that the Rolling Stones were coming to recording sessions at 9 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, of course not, right.
Wouldn't imagine that. And so the idea was that the studios were available during the day, but during the night they were booked until 4 in the morning, or maybe open-ended, And so the advertising business, they were courting the advertising business. The studios were recording advertising agencies so that we would come in and use the facilities during the day, because they were not doing anything during the day to speak of. And that's what started really happening. There were certain studios that were really making their facilities attractive to advertising agencies. But it was really funny because you'd come into the studio at 10 o'clock in the morning and there'd be some engineer who truly dragged himself into work, because he'd been up all night at a previous session, And what you were about to do, was of absolutely zero interest to this engineer. And I have a lot of sympathy for them. It was just not something they wanted to do. But the boss said be here at 10 o'clock, and so they were there at 10 o'clock. And who knows how long they'd been up the night before, or what they had been partaking of. So, but at the very least they were hungover, and they would come in, and it was difficult. It was really tough doing sessions then, because it was tough to get musicians that were really sort of up for it at that time of day too. We tried to do them a little later in the day if we could, but sometimes you'd be there in the daytime. And oddly enough, I would see people, maybe not at 10 o'clock, but at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, if we were still there, I'd see people who were recording people, who were from the record business, who would be at a certain studio, because everybody always had their favorite studios, and that was the only time they could get, because it was booked solid by somebody who was making an album or something. And so they would say, well, okay, we'll come in at noon or 1 o'clock or whatever, which was early for the record people. And one of these days I was doing, and I worked a lot at Western because I liked Western. I liked working with Chuck Britz, and who you probably know as the engineer on Pet Sounds. So, and I liked Chuck and working with him, and there were a couple of other engineers that I liked there, and so I used to do sessions there all the time. And it wasn't far from the agency. There were a lot of reasons why it was a pretty good choice. But I was there one day, and I think I really can't remember, but I think I either went to the coffee machine or to the water cooler or something, and saw Brian standing there, and of course I recognized him, but I'd never met him before. And I could hear, the closest studio to the water cooler, let's say, was, the door was open, and I could hear his voice coming out of that studio, him singing. And I introduced myself to him. Now, if I had met him on the street or at a party or almost anywhere else, I think he would have said a very quick hello and disappeared. But because I was in a recording studio, that sort of gave me some kind of validity, like maybe I was not an outsider, So but the other thing about Brian that's true today, just as true as it was then, is that if Brian's excited about something he's doing, he will ask, the FedEx delivery guy to come and listen to it. I mean, if he's just finished a song that he likes, and, the guy comes to repair the refrigerator, and walks in the front door, he'll grab the guy and say, hey, listen to this, tell me what you think, I mean, it's just, everybody will tell you that. It's a famous characteristic that he has. I mean, he's so, so excited about something that he's just done that he doesn't really think about who it is. He just wants a reaction, to it. And of course, you could argue that the perfect person to ask is the refrigerator repairman, because that's always his music. He's never wanted to have his music appeal to any particularly sophisticated segment of the audience. He just wanted everybody to love his music. So he didn't make any distinctions about who it was. I mean, anybody was just as valid a critic of his work as anybody else. And so, of course, I said, hi, how are you doing? You're Brian Wilson or something? And he said, yeah. And then I introduced myself, and he said, hey, come and listen to this, will you?
How cool.
Which was just amazing.
And what did you think at that moment when he invited you into that studio?
Well, I thought, I wasn't a giant Beach Boys or Brian Wilson fan. Now, by that, I should really clarify that. I wasn't a fanatic fan. But I used to drive down the street like everybody else in Southern California, and the DJ would come on and say, in 5 minutes we'll be playing the new Beach Boys, release. And I would pull over and park, because I didn't want to miss it. Only because when I heard it, I knew I was going to say the same thing I had said, the last 7 times in a row, which was, God damn it, they've done it again. How the hell did they do that?
Right.
And it would be, you'd hear like literally 6 bars of the song, and you'd say, son of a bitch, it's a hit. And you just knew it was. And so while I didn't own any Beach Boys albums at the time, in fact, as a matter of fact, today I only own about 2 Beach Boys albums, and you can guess one of them is Pet Sounds.
That's really interesting.
And the other one is, I don't know, something like Best of the Beach Boys or something. And
right.
I don't even know what it is. And I had never bought a Beach Boys record, but I had tremendous respect for Brian's ability to produce hits. And I thought the songs were beautiful, but I thought the lyrics were by and large pretty dopey because they were, about cars and surfing and stuff. And I just didn't think, I don't know, I just wasn't a big fan. So I didn't fall down, and pass out with emotion when I met him, but I was certainly impressed. And I was aware at that time that he was the real brains behind the Beach Boys. I knew he was the man. So he took me into this little studio, and all there was a couple of engineers and some keyboards in the studio. There was a regular acoustic piano, and there might have been a Hammond B3 and a Fender Rhodes electric piano or something. There were no synthesizers in those days, and so actually there probably were. I don't know when the Moogs started, but anyway, he just had a few pianos or keyboards in there, and that was it. There was nobody else in the session. Now there might have been earlier, but there wasn't anybody left then. And he said, "I'm just putting down a couple of demos of some new tunes." And so he said to the engineer, play that thing from the beginning or whatever it was, and he played something, and I said, oh yeah, that's great. And then he ran out into the studio. He told me to come with him. We ran out into the studio, and he played something on the piano that represented what he wanted to put over what we were hearing, so that I could hear sort of a counter, melody or a contrapuntal kind of something. I really can't remember at this point.
Right, right.
You understand, I have trouble remembering what I had for breakfast this
Oh,
morning.
sure. Well, listen, I'm in the same boat. Don't feel bad.
Although long-term memory is much better than short-term memory.
So you don't remember what he was playing,
I
right?
have no idea.
At all.
People have asked me,
Yeah.
did that turn out to be, who knows what, Good
Right.
Vibrations or something? And the answer is, I don't know. I can't remember.
Right.
There were just fragments, of songs. And I was sitting at the piano with him on the bench, and he said, I sat down, I guess, next to him. He played these things that were supposed to go over the stuff that had already been recorded. And I said, oh, yeah, that's great. And then I said, actually, I wrote something, and I started playing something that I had written once, and he said, oh, yeah, that's great. And then, it was just one of those things of, then he played something else, that a different tune that he was working on, or a feel, or he didn't, very often Brian would play a feel. Have you heard that thing? He'd say, have you heard that thing by so-and-so, where it goes like this? And he said, well, I sort of like that feel, but I think it should be faster, whatever, something that would be good in minor, or whatever he might say. And then he'd have a little twist on it sometimes, or sometimes he would just have literally invented his own feel and some changes, and he would just bang away. I mean, he really plays very vigorously for the most part, and he would just be banging away and singing, and it was great. But, of course, I had a recording session going on, and I had only gone out to get a cup of coffee or something. So after about 10 or 15 minutes, I said, hey, this is fabulous, but I got to go back to my session. And he said, oh, great, well, I'm glad you like it or whatever. And I told him my name again, I think, and I might have given him a business card, which I certainly had, from the advertising agency. And that was it. And then we had a mutual friend, he and I, by the name of Lauren Schwarz. And Lauren and I had gone to college together. Actually, we'd gone to junior college together. I went to junior college and then to college. We were just buddies, and he used to have these parties at his house, not regularly, but fairly frequently. Actually at his apartment. He had an apartment. He'd have a bunch of people over, and most of them were people from the music business. But he knew these people from the music business just by going to clubs. He would go to clubs, and he was very outgoing and fairly charismatic, I guess, is the word, so that when he would, after a show was over, he'd go up to the stage before the guys left the stage or something and talk to them, and he'd sort of make contact with them. And he knew a lot of people in the music business, so he would invite these people over to his place, and he was also a sort of connection for marijuana and beyond, I guess. Is that the term? Sort of like Toy Story, where he says infinity and beyond.
Right.
I only ever smoked dope at his house. I mean, that was, everybody was doing that sort of openly. That was considered, perfectly acceptable.
Right.
But then there were people sneaking off to other little rooms doing what I'm told was probably heroin at the time, because there wasn't a lot of other stuff. I mean, they might have been doing hash, which was sort of just a concentrated form of marijuana, but there wasn't, crystal meth and all that kind of, well, I guess there must have been amphetamines, I guess.
Maybe some LSD.
Oh, yeah, LSD as well. But that was being done in private,
Right.
Future Prophet Records presents Gargoyle's new single, Alligator Head. This and other essential singles from the New York Underground, all designed to catapult today's great bands into tomorrow, and all available at futureprophetrecords.com. That's PROPHET, futureprophetrecords.com. Oh, hi, I'm Dave Gebrow. I threw my career as a licensed hearing instrument specialist in the trash, sold my house, and moved to the East Coast with my wife and 5-year-old son in order to focus on making the ultimate weekly podcast for music obsessives thrive. But weekly wasn't enough for me, so I bumped it up to 4 shows a week. Becoming a subscriber to Discograffiti's Patreon gives you access to hundreds of exclusive episodes. As a 2-show per week private, you get the weekly show by and for our Patreon family, the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound podcast. As a 3-show a week lieutenant, you'll get early release, ad-free, extended director's cuts of the main show. They're the shows as they were intended to be heard. Plus, you'll gain access to half the Patreon archive and the upcoming Beach Boys Behind the Mirror companion episodes, which will feature dozens of special guests from within the Beach Boys camp talking about and rating their music. But as a 4-show per week major, you'll be drowning in a flood of must-hear binge listening, because I'll be bombarding you with episodes about super cool bands that are too subterranean for free Fridays. It's like going to music college, but with a tuition that makes all kinds of sense. Plus, our entire Patreon archive is yours. Discograffiti's Top 10, our Buried Treasure show, Rock Cousteau, our Slag Off show, Queasy Listening, and the Private Press with Paul Major. And all that for the price of only a cup of coffee a week. Times are tough, you say? Fret not, because there's a $1 tier. Or you could just join as a basic member and buy episodes piecemeal from our Patreon shop. Don't risk feeling badly about yourself by not giving. Check out patreon.com/discograffiti to find the tier that's right for you. Once again, that's patreon.com/discograffiti. This episode is brought to you in part by Bespoke LA. Located in the Fairfax district of Los Angeles, Bespoke LA is the modern podcaster's dream come true. It's got 2 podcast pods available, one with audio only and the other with both audio and video. Just think, you can start your own podcast tomorrow without investing a single penny in equipment. What, you don't have experience editing? Don't even sweat it. For an additional fee, Bespoke LA can edit your podcast. Or not, it's entirely up to you. Rates start at $75 an hour with discounts if you book 4 sessions at once. Go to bespokela.com/podcast. That's BSPOKELA.com/podcast for more information or to book your time today. And be sure to tell them that Dave sent you for a one-time 25% discount.
And I went to a couple of these parties, and I met David Crosby, and I met Jim McGuinn, all the Byrds, and they brought a record over one time. They came to one of these parties, and they'd just come from a session. And they said, hey, listen to this. This is a thing we just recorded. And they played it, and it was 8 Miles High, which was a pretty out there kind of record.
Right.
And I can remember listening to it and thinking, God, I just think that is amazing. I mean, that's just wonderful. But forget it, guys. This is not going to be a hit. I mean, I didn't say that to anybody.
Right.
What I was thinking in my head was, man, people are going to think these guys are, like, on another planet. I mean, I really liked it. I thought it was really interesting and so forth, but I thought, man, that's just too out there. I don't know if it was a big hit, but it was certainly a hit. So it just shows you how how good a judge I am of what's a hit. But I mean, I just remember, that the guitar solo, particularly on that thing, was just, really, really, sort of really out there, I thought. But it was fun because, you met all these people, and occasionally I would meet Brian there. I met him a couple of times there. But Brian wouldn't come for very long. It was really strange. You almost wondered why he came at all, because he would come, I guess, thinking that maybe it was going to be fun or not having anything else to do and thinking, okay, well, I'll go. And then when he got there, he was just such I was going to say reclusive. It's not that. He's just not a social animal, He would sit in a corner, I mean, people would talk to him, but, then, they would move away and talk to somebody else, and he'd just be sitting there alone, and after a while he would get up and leave.
He would just come by himself?
Yeah, he was often by himself.
Wow.
He was married to Marilyn at the time. I'm trying to remember if I ever saw him with her. I think I might have seen him one time there with her sister, because he used to hang out with her sister even after he was married to her, which was really a whole other thing.
Right.
And, but I mean, that's been documented.
Oh, yeah. I think he had a real affinity for Marilyn's sister before he started to become involved with Marilyn.
Well, you know better than I about that.
Yeah.
It sounds familiar. I think I probably heard.
Yeah, I mean, at least that's what's been reported, but,
right.
But
she was just too young. I mean, she was, this is before movie stars, before, the kind of relationships that, well, no, it's not true. I shouldn't say that, because the people I'm thinking of are, the Michael Douglases and the...
Right.
But after all, they're not with 13-year-old girls.
No.
Jerry Lee Lewis holds the record, I guess.
Yeah, that was a pretty racy thing for that time, right?
Yeah. But I don't know how old she was, but she was, well, she must have been, at least in the beginning, because it was before I was friends with her. That must have started when she was mighty young, but I saw him somewhere with her, and I think it might have been at one of Lauren's parties. But, I just so that may have refreshed his memory about who I was, because he did act like he sort of knew me and remembered me. I mean, he may have even said some things that made me think, oh, yeah, he really remembers,
Right.
But that was it. And then, apparently, now this part is all hearsay on my part, apparently he and Lauren had a conversation at another time in which he was bemoaning the fact that he had this whole album to do for a Capitol. He was way behind. The boys were out of the country, but he didn't want to write with them anyway. I mean, them means Mike. And he didn't want to write with any of the other people he'd been writing with. But he was really under pressure to get this album out, and he really didn't know what to do. That's been reported to me. I don't know for a fact that took place, but it sounds reasonable.
Right.
And apparently at some point Lauren, maybe Brian had talked about meeting me, or something, and Lauren may have said to him, hey, why don't you call Tony? Because he's a bright guy. Lauren really is an intellect. I mean, he was the best read person maybe that any of us knew at the time. He had read everything, that was hip to read. Herman Hesse and, Siddhartha and, Edgar Cayce and all the stuff that was cool to read those days.
Right.
And but most of it's spiritual of one kind or another, but he was a pretty articulate guy too. And so when he said that I was bright and articulate, that must have impressed Brian, because I know Brian has always thought of him as being some kind of, really highly intellectual person. So then I get this phone call. The phone rings in my office at the agency, and I pick it up, and he says, "Hello, this is Brian Wilson, and I need to write this album for Capitol, and I don't have anybody to write it with, and I'm under a lot of pressure because we owed, we're already 3 months behind. We should have had it 3 months ago, and I was wondering if you wanted to work on some of the songs with me." Which is like out of the clear blue, somebody saying, "Would you like, $50,000?"
All right, that about does it. Stay tuned, because next week brings upon us the final installment of our Pet Sounds Deep Dive. Okay, here's the week up ahead. This Sunday, our weekly show within a show, the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound podcast, drops for our Patreon's private tier. These are real people with talent and a burning fire deep inside, just like you and I. Then come Monday, the major tier gets a very special treat. It's our exclusive interview with Rob Cassis, host of the 1001 Album Complaints podcast, who gives us a step-by-step guide on how to make and release your own record. He's just released, of all things, a Ghostbusters concept album called Stay Puffed, which you can order at Linktree/The Chop Unlimited. That's linktr.ee/The Chop Unlimited. And he lays it out for us all nice and simple, so you too can follow the steps to actually making and releasing your own concept or non-concept album masterpiece. There will be a very short sneak peek running publicly for free on Monday morning, but the entirety of the show will only be accessible on the major tier of our Patreon. And then on Wednesday, the Lieutenant tier gets their early release, ad-free, super extended director's cut of our Caroline No Deep Dive podcast. It's the episode as it was truly intended to be heard, with all the essentials left intact. And then come Friday, everyone else gets to join in on the action. A heartfelt Discograffiti thanks goes out to my beautiful wife and son, Jen and Mason, Chuck Granata, Richard Holland, Rudy Fishman, Becky Boyd, Jay Schultz, Bespoke LA, my mom, my dad, Joe Kennedy for that killer new theme song, my incredibly loyal fans, and especially the entire Patreon community, the Soldiers of Sound. I love every last one of you, and this show would not exist without you, my friends. Speaking of friends, it's high time for some new ones. They're in our Facebook group, Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound. That's the best way to find out what's coming up on the show, but there's a hell of a lot more. You get recaps of the day in music history, the ability to pitch questions to guests, polls that put you in the driver's seat on guest and band decisions, access to a thriving creative hub if you're looking for a collaborator, and much more. So make sure you don't miss out. You can find the link to the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound Facebook page right there in the show notes. And if you don't mess with the Zuck, no sweat. Just email me at info@discograffiti.com and I'll keep you in the loop. So now that it's done and you want more, another way to dive even deeper into the classic rock and roll from the 1960s is to go to the Beach Boys Season 1, Catch a Wave, 1961 to 1964, from episode 189 on, the Righteous Brothers Bill Medley interview, that's 181 and 182, my interview with the Free Design, that's 160 to 162, my epic interview with the Mamas and Papas Michelle Phillips, that's 141 to 159, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, that's 137, my 12-hour interview with Terry Kirkman and Jules Alexander from the Association, that's 109 to 113, Vashti Bunyan reading her entire output, that's 103 to 104, Sergio Diaz from Os Mutantes, that's 86 and 87, Bert Summer, that's 83 and 84, Sweetwater is episode 79, a tribute to David Crosby, 77 and 78, Andrew Tuttle rates the Monks, 74, Jim Florentine on Black Sabbath is 64 to 68. Lou Barlow on the Zombies is 59 and 60. Marvin Gaye biographer David Ritz rates Marvin Gaye, that's 45 to 47. Blind Faith is 43. Anthony Fantano rates the Velvet Underground is 32 and 33. Bob Forrest rates the band is 25 and 27. Monkees manager Andrew Sandoval rates the Monkees, that's 22 and 23. Don Randy rates David Axelrod is 17. Badfinger is 16. The Bee Gees is 10 and 11. Sly and the Family Stone is 5, 6, and 7. And Pink Floyd is 1 and 2. And of course, be sure to mark your calendars, because next Friday, November 7th, we're coming at you with the final installment of our Pet Sounds Deep Dive. And so, from now till then, don't let our youth go to waste, lads and ladies. It's Discograffiti!